This next question comes from Brahim Hamashef. I probably got your name wrong, but Brahim is probably right. And this is in response to the Roland D05 and Korg P3 video, a video I did in November 2017. And he writes, I have a Korg P3 piano. I'm writing an editor for it. Maybe you can test it when it's ready and make a video for it. Note that from the schematic one can discover that the heart of the Korg P3 piano module really is the Yamaha TX16 sampler. So you can do more than piano really. Hence the multitude of cards. I know the address and data bus pins on the connector. We can make it become anything. A TR-808. Very interesting comment. First of all, I did offer to test his editor, but I don't think I've ever been furnished with the completed editor so that I could film it for the channel. I could be wrong, but I don't remember ever receiving it. So I apologise for that. I couldn't do that. Secondly, I didn't realise, but I'm not surprised that the Korg P3 has the same chip as the Yamaha TX16W. And the reason for that is quite easily Yamaha owned Korg between 1987 and 1993, and the Korg P3, or Symphony as it's known in other territories within the world, was released in 1998. So, or 1999, it might be 1999. I think it's 1988 and 89 rather than 99. So it was released in 1988 or 1989, and I can't find out exactly where. And the Yamaha TX16 was also released in 1988, so it makes sense that the R&D teams were working on the same chipset. And actually it's really interesting from a Yamaha perspective, because Yamaha at one point were making more money selling chips than they were selling synthesizers. Just that's a good point during this kind of period of time. And the fact that it's more flexible than the bass piano also doesn't surprise me, because quite often what they did was they took stuff from other machines and effectively dumbed it down because the components were cheap per se, rather than having to reinvent and redesign the circuitry. I got into a discussion years ago with a guy on the channel that claimed the P3 was a dumbed down M1. It could generate sounds but didn't have the effects that the M1 came with. And your comment really reminded me of this conversation. But I must admit, it was a rather drunken conversation, so it's a bit sketchy. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next one comes from Sean Curran. In response to this thing could be a DMX. I love my JX8P, a video I did in December 2021. And Sean writes, thanks John, interesting discussion around 80s drum machines. I'm going to ignore the obvious. Every drum machine has a unique workflow. Discussion and stick to sound reproduction. Getting down to brass tacks. Any sampler can produce and record sound of a drum machine with the right samples loaded. That's the very nature of a sampler, in brackets, drop mic. However, there is an interesting topic left in the wake of that statement. Every sampler records and produces samplers slightly differently. Each has its own sound and charm. Therefore, it can never be a DMX, since it lacks the filters and circuitry of a DMX. That is why, although samplers have been around since the 80s, musicians are still willing to pay insane prices for the LM1, the Lindrum and the DMX drum machines. They have the recorded sound, but something is missing. Hopefully Behringer's Lindrum will provide the ability to sound and playback sounds with that warm analog 28 kHz Lind sound. This will be cool for reproducing drum sounds from the 80s. But let's go further. There is the obvious Tears for Fears shout drum. which sampled and burned to EEPROM sounds from the 2-bar opening breaks when the love breaks. But let's go even further. What about producing a beat from a sampled vinyl processed through a Lin circuitry? That's never been possible, and will be interesting to colour those samples in such a manner. But let's go just about as far as we can. What about simply using the Behringer Lindrum as a post-process lo-fi master and effect, thereby colouring the whole track or master? Tons of unique possibilities for producing music awaits us. Very, very food for thought, that one. I'm not going to go on to some of the issues, but I know some of the comments, but I'm going to just pick a couple here. First, can I expand the comment, any sampler can reproduce the recorded sound of any drum machine? I agree with you. But what you can't do with a sampler is change the tonal qualities of the sample. The sample is static, whereas a tone generator is dynamic. In other words, the based sample can be changed. And this is a key point, and I've said this many times before on the channel. Samplers are great, but they capture a tone at a point in time. If you want to alter the dynamics of that tone on the original machine, you just dial some parameters. But on the sample is the sample. Yes, you can put effects and filtering on afterwards, but you can't change the tonal qualities of the beginning sample. The sample is the sample. You also make a good point relating to the filters, effects and workflows of the target drum machines. The reason circuitry modelling works so well is because it mimics the generation of the tonal quality the instrument is emulating. Key point what you just said. Whether it be the Aria boutique range or the Behringer instruments using ARM technology, you are therefore able to change the tonal quality of the instrument as if you were using the original instrument. Something a sampler just clearly lacks. I am too hoping the Lin sound following the modelling of the original machine is reproduced accurately by Behringer when they release their new machine.